Imagine waking up on a June morning in 1816. You pull back the curtains expecting sunshine and warmth. Instead, you see snow. Thick, white snow covering your vegetable garden, your fields, everything you'd planted for the summer harvest. Your breath fogs in the air as you step outside. The temperature reads 32 degrees Fahrenheit. In June. In New England, you check your calendar twice, certain there's been some mistake. You might think this is just a bad dream, a strange nightmare where seasons have forgotten their purpose. Your neighbors emerge from their houses wrapped in winter coats, staring at the same impossible scene. The silence is heavy, broken only by the sound of snow crunching under confused footsteps. This was reality for millions of people across the globe. The year summer simply vanished. This isn't your typical science video. It's designed to help you unwind, to let your mind drift, and yes, maybe even to fall asleep. While you're settling in, relaxing, letting go of the day, you'll be absorbing something remarkable about how our planet can reshape human history in the span of a single eruption. So settle in, get comfortable, and let your curiosity carry you through tonight's journey into the year that changed everything. And let me know in the comments, what drew you to this topic? Are you fascinated by climate disasters? Do you enjoy stories about human resilience? Or do you just find comfort in tales that make you grateful for predictable weather? Now get comfortable, dim the lights if you'd like. Maybe grab a warm drink, and let's ease into tonight's exploration of the summer that never came. Consider yourself standing on the island of Sumbawa, Indonesia, April 10th, 1815. You're a local fisherman, maybe 40 years old, weathered by years of sun and salt water. You've lived here your entire life, as did your father, and his father before him. The mountain called Tambora looms in the distance, quiet and familiar, like an old friend who never speaks. The morning starts like any other. You're mending nets on the beach, the familiar rhythm of your hands working through the tangled fibers. Your wife is preparing breakfast over a small fire. Your children are playing in the sand, their laughter mixing with the sound of waves against the shore. Then the world explodes. The sound alone defies description. Imagine standing next to a freight train, then multiply that by 1,000. The roar is so loud it's heard 1,200 miles away in Sumatra. People in Australia think it's cannon fire from a naval battle. The British garrison in Java sends ships to investigate what they assume is a siege. You feel the sound in your bones, in your teeth, in the very marrow of your being. The vibration travels through the ground, through the water, through the air itself. Your children stop playing and look up at you with wide, frightened eyes. The blast sends a column of ash and rock 28 miles into the sky. 28 miles. That's higher than commercial airliners fly, higher than most weather occurs, so high that the debris doesn't just fall back down, it spreads across the entire planet like spilled ink on wet paper. You watch the mountain's peak simply disappear. One moment it's there, solid and permanent as mountains are supposed to be. The next moment it's gone, replaced by a boiling cloud of destruction that rises and rises until it touches the edge of space itself. The immediate destruction is biblical in scope. Pyroclastic flows race down the mountainside at 400 miles per hour. These are rivers of superheated gas and rock, moving faster than anything on Earth. They incinerate everything in their path. Trees, buildings, people. Nothing can outrun them. Nothing can survive them. You grab your family and run toward higher ground, your bare feet slipping on the suddenly trembling earth. Behind you, entire villages are disappearing under waves of molten rock, and ash. The air itself seems to be burning. The flows reach the sea with a sound like thunder that never stops. When superheated rock meets water, the explosion is violent beyond imagination. Steam rises in massive clouds, adding to the chaos already consuming the sky. 10,000 people die that day on Sumbawa alone. Entire communities are erased in minutes. Languages spoken for centuries fall silent forever. Cultural traditions that survived countless generations disappear in the time it takes for molten rock to travel from mountain to sea. You and your family survive somehow. You find yourselves on a hillside, watching your world transform into something alien and hostile. The familiar coastline is gone, reshaped by flows of cooling lava. The mountain that defined your horizon for 4 decades has a different shape now, scarred and shortened by its own violent rebirth. The immediate eruption lasts for days. Each explosion sends more debris into the atmosphere. The ash cloud doesn't respect borders or understand human geography. It simply spreads, driven by wind patterns that circle the globe. Within a week, the ash reaches Java. Within a month, it's in India. By summer, particles from Tambora are floating in the skies above Europe and North America. The mountain has literally touched every corner of the Earth's atmosphere. You might think the worst is over. The explosions have stopped. The immediate danger has passed. You and your family are alive, which is more than many can say. You begin to think about rebuilding, about starting over. You have no way of knowing that the real disaster is just beginning. The ash and sulfur particles suspended in the atmosphere are about to do something unprecedented in recorded human history. They're going to change the weather for the entire planet. They're going to steal the summer from every farmer, every family, every community on Earth. The particles act like a mirror, reflecting sunlight back into space just when crops need it most. Global temperatures begin to drop. At first, just a degree or two, the difference between a comfortable room and needing a light sweater. Climate is a delicate balance, and even small changes can topple everything. That degree or two is about to trigger crop failures, famines, migrations, and social upheavals that will reshape human civilization. You're still on that hillside in Indonesia, trying to make sense of what's happened to your world. You can't know that similar scenes of confusion and devastation are about to play out in New England and Europe and China. You can't know that your local disaster is about to become a global catastrophe. All you know is that the mountain that watched over your childhood has tried to destroy everything you've ever known. And somehow, impossibly, you're still alive to tell the story. The sky above you is the color of rust and old blood. The sun, when you can see it through the ash, looks dim and distant. The familiar rhythms of your life, the seasonal patterns your people have depended on for generations, are about to change in ways you can't imagine. You're witnessing the beginning of the year without a summer, the year that will prove how fragile human civilization really is, the year that will show the world just how connected we all are, whether we realize it or not. Let's move ahead now to the spring of 1816. You're a farmer in Vermont, maybe 35 years old, with strong hands and a face weathered by years of working outdoors. You've been farming this land for over a decade. You know every stone in your fields, every tree along your property line, every subtle change in the seasons. You've inherited this farm from your father, 200 acres of good soil, a sturdy house, a barn that's seen better days. You have a wife and 3 children. This land is everything to you. It's your past, your present, and your future. Spring arrives late in 1816, later than usual. The snow lingers well into April, and even when it melts, the ground beneath is hard and cold. You've seen late springs before, so you're not particularly worried. Weather has always been unpredictable in New England. You plant your corn in early May, just as your father taught you. The kernels go into soil that feels different somehow, harder to turn, reluctant to warm. You plant your vegetables, your beans, your squash, everything your family needs to survive the coming winter. May passes into June and something feels wrong. The days should be getting warmer, longer, more generous. Instead, they remain cool and overcast. The sun seems dimmer when it appears at all. The sky has a strange copper-colored tint that you've never seen before. Your neighbors are starting to talk. Old-timers who've lived through 40 or 50 New England winters say they've never seen anything like this. The growing season feels suspended, as if nature itself is holding its breath. Then comes the morning that changes everything. June 6th, 1816. You wake to find frost covering your fields, heavy frost, ice crystals thick as your thumb coating every surface. Your corn, barely 3 inches tall, lies blackened and dead. Your vegetable garden looks like it's been through a fire. Months of work, your family's entire food supply for the coming year, destroyed in a single night. Your wife finds you standing in the ruined garden, staring at the devastation. She doesn't say anything. There's nothing to say. You've both seen bad weather before, but this is different. This feels like the end of something. The frost isn't isolated to your farm. It's everywhere. Across Vermont, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, farmers are waking up to the same scene of destruction. Cornfields that were green yesterday are black today. Vegetable gardens that promised abundant harvests are now graveyards of frozen plants. You decide to replant. You have enough seeds saved from last year's harvest. The frost was a fluke, you tell yourself. A late, cold snap that won't happen again. You work from dawn to dusk, preparing the soil again, planting new seeds, hoping for better luck. June gives way to July, and the weather becomes even stranger. The temperature hovers in the 40s and 50s, far too cold for summer. Your new plantings grow slowly, if at all. The corn stalks are stunted, the leaves pale and sickly. Then comes July 4th, Independence Day. The day when summer should be at its peak, when the heat should be oppressive and the humidity unbearable. Instead, you wake to find snow falling outside your window. Snow. In July, in New England, you step outside and catch snowflakes on your tongue, just as you did as a child. They taste the same, cold and clean and impossible. Your children emerge from the house, delighted by the novelty of snow in summer. They don't understand what it means. You understand. This is something unprecedented, something that threatens everything you've built, everything you've planned for. The snow doesn't last long, but it doesn't need to. Your replanted crops are dead again. Your livestock huddled together in the barn, confused by the cold that should never come. Your stored hay, meant to last through the winter, is already running low because the animals need extra feed to stay warm. August arrives with more of the same. Temperatures that should be in the 80s struggle to reach 60. Your breath still fogs in the morning air. The leaves on the trees are starting to turn. You're not alone in your struggle. Across New England, farmers are facing the same impossible choice: stay and starve, or abandon everything and head west, to Ohio, to Indiana, to anywhere the growing season might be long enough to plant a crop and harvest it before winter arrives. The newspapers are full of stories about families packing their belongings, loading wagons with whatever they can carry. They're calling it the Great Migration, but it feels more like flight, like running from the end of the world. You hold out longer than most. This is your land, your father's land. You can't just abandon it. Your wife supports your decision, even though you can see the worry in her eyes. The children ask why other families are leaving, why the Johnsons' farm down the road is empty now. September brings the first real killing frost. Your last desperate attempt at a late harvest withers overnight. The reality finally hits you with the force of a physical blow. There will be no crop this year, no vegetables to store for winter, no corn to grind into meal. You have some money saved, enough to buy supplies for a few months. Your neighbors who stayed are in the same situation. Everyone is rationing, sharing what little they have, hoping the next growing season will be better. The general store in town is running low on everything. Flour costs 3 times what it did last year. Salt pork is almost impossible to find. The merchant explains that the same weather that killed your crops has affected everyone. There simply isn't enough food to go around. You start to understand the scope of this disaster. It's not just Vermont. It's not just New England. The entire world is dealing with the same impossible weather, the same failed harvests, the same desperate choices. Your wife suggests you write to your brother in Ohio. He moved west 5 years ago, said the soil was better there, the climate more reliable. You've always been proud of your New England heritage, proud of the land your father cleared with his own hands. Asking for help feels like admitting defeat. Winter comes early in 1816. By October, snow is falling regularly. By November, the ground is frozen solid. You've burned through most of your firewood already, and it's not even officially winter yet. The children are always hungry now. Your wife has gotten creative with what little food you have, making soup from bones and scraps, stretching every grain of rice until it's almost water. You've eaten your seed corn, the kernels you were saving for next year's planting. That's when you know you've lost. When you're eating your future to survive the present. When hope becomes just another luxury you can't afford. You make the decision on a cold December morning. You're going to sell the farm if you can find a buyer. Pack up what you can carry. Join the thousands of other families heading west, looking for a place where summer still exists. This land has been in your family for 2 generations. Your father is buried in the small cemetery beyond the north field. You're abandoning not just a farm, but a history. The buyer you eventually find offers you a fraction of what the land is worth. He's taking a risk, he says. Who knows if the weather will ever return to normal? Who knows if this land will ever be farmable again? You take his offer. You use the money to buy a wagon, supplies for the journey, and passage on a boat that will take you and your family down the Connecticut River to the Hudson, then west to Buffalo, then further west to whatever new life awaits. As you load your belongings into the wagon, you take one last look at the fields your father cleared, the barn he built, the house where your children were born. The mountain that erupted in Indonesia has stolen more than just your summer. It's stolen your entire way of life. You have no way of knowing that similar scenes are playing out across the world. In Europe, where the situation is even worse. In China, where the monsoons have failed. In India, where famine is already claiming lives. So you're just one family among millions, forced to abandon everything because of particles in the atmosphere that you can't see from a mountain you've never heard of. In a country you couldn't find on a map. The wagon wheels creak as you begin your journey west. Your old life grows smaller behind you until it disappears entirely. Ahead lies uncertainty, but at least it's uncertainty with the possibility of hope. You've become part of the Great Migration, the exodus from the year without a summer. Your story is ending here, but it's also beginning somewhere else. The volcano that stole the sun has also stolen your past, but it can't steal your future. The road ahead is long and difficult, but you're not the first to travel it. Other families have made this journey, other farmers have started over. The human spirit is remarkably adaptable, and you're about to discover just how strong that spirit can be Cross the Atlantic now to the cobblestone streets of Paris in the summer of 1816. You're a baker's wife, 32 years old, with flour permanently embedded under your fingernails and calluses on your palms from years of kneading dough. Your husband runs a small bakery that's been in his family for 3 generations. You wake at 3 in the morning, as you have every day for the past 12 years. The routine is sacred, unchanging. Light the ovens, prepare the dough, begin the day's bread. Your husband works beside you in comfortable silence, his movements as familiar as your own breathing. The wheat arrives at dawn, as it always has. Except this morning, there's less of it. The wagon that usually carries 50 sacks holds only 30. The driver, an older man named Henri, whom you've known for years, shakes his head when you ask about the shortage. The harvest was terrible, he says, his voice heavy with worry. Worst anyone can remember. The grain that did survive is selling for prices you wouldn't believe. You've heard rumors about failed crops, about strange weather across France, but your life revolves around the small world of flour and yeast and rising dough. The outside world has always felt distant, something that happened to other people in other places. Your husband calculates the day's bread production. 30 sacks instead of 50 means fewer loaves. Fewer loaves means disappointed customers. Disappointed customers means less money, and you're already barely making ends meet. The first customers arrive at sunrise, as they always do. Workers heading to their jobs. Mothers buying bread for their children's breakfast. Old men who've come to your bakery every morning for as long as you can remember. You serve them with the same smile you always have, but the shelf behind you is noticeably less full. By 8 o'clock you're sold out completely. People are still arriving, still expecting bread, still needing to feed their families. You have to turn them away. Watch their faces change from expectation to confusion to growing anger. "What do you mean, no bread?" asks Madame Dubois, who has 5 children and a husband who works in the textile mills. "I have money. I need bread." You explain about the reduced wheat delivery, about the failed harvests, about circumstances beyond your control. She listens, but you can see the desperation in her eyes. Money doesn't matter if there's nothing to buy. This scene repeats itself throughout the day. People who've never had trouble buying bread suddenly facing empty shelves. Families who've always taken their daily loaf for granted now competing for whatever scraps remain. Your husband raises prices the next day. He has to. The wheat costs more, so the bread must cost more. Simple economics. A loaf that sold for 3 sous yesterday now costs 5. The customers grumble, but they pay. They have no choice. Within a week, bread costs 8 sous. The week after, 12. People who could afford to feed their families comfortably are now making impossible choices. Do you buy bread or milk? Do you feed the children or save money for rent? The city begins to change. You notice it first in the way people walk. There's an urgency now, a desperate quality to their movements. They hurry from shop to shop, searching for food that's increasingly difficult to find. Their faces are thinner, their clothes looser. Children begin appearing at your door, beggars, small faces pressed against your window, watching you work with hungry eyes. They know you have nothing to give them, but they hope anyway. Hope is sometimes all that's left, and the situation worsens throughout the summer. Other bakeries begin closing when they can no longer afford wheat. The lines outside your shop grow longer, more desperate. People arrive before dawn, hoping to be first when you open. Sometimes they wait all night. You start recognizing the signs of real hunger. The hollow cheeks, the way people's hands shake when they count their coins, the careful way they handle bread when they finally manage to buy a loaf. These are people who've never known real want. suddenly facing starvation. August brings the riots. You're working in the bakery when you hear the sound of breaking glass, shouting, the rapid footsteps of people running. Your husband looks up from his mixing bowl, flour still coating his hands. "Stay here," he tells you, but you both know that's impossible. The shop is your livelihood, your entire world. You can't just hide and hope for the best. The crowd appears at the end of your street like a wave of desperate humanity. Maybe 200 people, many of them faces you recognize. Your neighbors, your customers, people who've always been peaceful and law-abiding, and now they're carrying clubs, stones, anything they can use as weapons. They're not targeting you specifically, they're targeting anyone who has food, anyone who represents the system that's failing them, bakers, merchants, government officials, anyone who might have answers or at least something to eat. The crowd reaches your shop just as you're trying to close the shutters. Hands pound on the windows, voices demand bread you don't have. Someone throws a stone, the glass shatters, and suddenly the mob is inside your shop. These are desperate people, not criminals. They take what little bread you have, empty your flour bins, search for any food they can find. Some of them apologize as they work, as if good manners can somehow make theft acceptable. "We have children," one woman explains as she stuffs bread into her apron. "They haven't eaten in 2 days." You understand, you sympathize. You might do the same thing if your positions were reversed. Understanding doesn't make it less terrifying. The riot moves on to other shops, other targets. You are left standing in the ruins of your bakery, 3 generations of family business destroyed in minutes. The ovens are still warm, the smell of bread still lingering in the air, but everything else is gone. You're not alone. Across Paris, across France, similar scenes play out. Bread riots become a daily occurrence. The government tries to maintain order, but hungry people have nothing left to lose. They'll risk imprisonment, even death, for a chance to feed their families. The newspapers report similar conditions across Europe. In Germany, people are eating grass, boiling leather to make soup. In Switzerland, entire villages are abandoned as people flee to regions where food might be more plentiful. In Ireland, the potato crop has failed completely and famine is spreading like wildfire. You consider your options. You could try to rebuild if you can find wheat, and if the riots don't return, you could leave Paris, head to the countryside where food might be more available. You could stay and hope the situation improves. None of these choices feel good. They all involve risk, uncertainty, the possibility of failure. You're discovering that survival sometimes means choosing between bad options and worse ones. The city government begins distributing emergency rations, thin soup, day-old bread, whatever they can find. The lines stretch for blocks and fights break out regularly. People who've never known desperation are learning its lessons quickly. You join these lines, standing for hours in the hope of receiving enough food to last another day. The people around you are hollow-eyed, listless, their conversations focused entirely on food. Where to find it, how to afford it, how to make it last. A woman next to you talks about eating rats. Rats are plentiful in Paris and they're meat. Protein, she's heard they taste like chicken if you cook them right. Another man discusses the nutritional value of tree bark. Certain types can be ground into flour, he claims. They won't satisfy hunger, but they'll keep you alive a little longer. He speaks with the authority of someone who's already tried it. These conversations would have horrified you a year ago. Now they seem perfectly reasonable. Survival changes your perspective on what's acceptable, what's necessary, what's human. Travel now to a village in the Yunnan province of China, where the monsoon rains that should have arrived in May are nowhere to be seen. You're a rice farmer, 43 years old, with soil permanently stained into the creases of your hands and worry lines etched deep around your eyes. Your rice paddy, the same one your grandfather worked, stretches out before you like a cracked mirror. The water that should be knee-deep is gone, leaving behind dried mud that splits and curls in the heat. The young rice plants you transplanted in the spring are withering, their green leaves turning brown and brittle. You've seen dry seasons before, every farmer has. The monsoons sometimes arrive late, sometimes bring less rain than expected. You've learned to adapt, to conserve water, to make the most of what nature provides. This is different. This is the absence of rain itself. Your wife stands beside you at the edge of the empty paddy. She's holding your youngest son, barely 2 years old, while your older children squat in the shade of the single tree that borders your field. They're all looking at you with the expectation that you'll somehow fix this, that you'll find a way to make the rice grow without water. The well is almost dry, your wife says quietly. She doesn't want to frighten the children, but they need to understand the situation. Maybe enough for drinking water for another week? You nod, trying to project confidence you don't feel. The village well has never gone dry before. Your grandfather used to say it was blessed by the water spirits, that it would provide for your family as long as you respected the land. Now you wonder if you've somehow failed in that respect. The village elder calls a meeting that evening. 23 families gather in the small temple, their faces reflecting the same worry you see in your own family. The elder, a man named Chen, who's lived through 70 summers, speaks in measured tones about the situation. The drought extends far beyond our village, he explains. Travelers from the south report the same conditions. No rain, failed crops, empty wells. The government has promised aid, but he shrugs, a gesture that says everything about their confidence in official help. Other farmers share their stories. The Wang family's vegetable garden is completely dead. The Zhao family's fruit trees are dropping their leaves. The Liu family has already slaughtered their pig, unable to feed it and needing the meat while it's still good. Old man Feng, who's 84 and remembers more harvests than anyone, shakes his head slowly. I've never seen anything like this, he says. The sky is angry with us, but I don't know why. You walk home through the village, passing houses where families are gathered around their evening meals. The portions are smaller than they used to be, the conversations more subdued. Children who used to play in the streets until dark now sit quietly with their parents, sensing the tension even if they don't understand its source. Your own family's dinner consists of rice from last year's harvest, mixed with water to make it go further. The children eat without complaint, but you can see they're still hungry when they finish. There's no more rice to give them. Over the next few weeks, the situation deteriorates rapidly. The government sends inspectors who examine the dead crops, make notes in official ledgers, and promise aid that never materializes. The traveling merchants who used to buy your rice stop coming. There's no rice to buy. Families begin leaving the village, the younger ones mostly, people who can still travel long distances in search of work or food. They take what little they can carry and head toward the cities, hoping urban areas might have more resources. You consider joining them. Your wife is young enough to make the journey and the children are adaptable. Cities have always seemed foreign and frightening to you, but staying in a village without water or food seems more frightening still. The decision becomes easier when your youngest son falls ill. The fever starts suddenly and within hours he's burning up, his small body shaking with chills. Your wife tries to cool him with damp cloths, but water is too precious to waste on anything except drinking. Other children in the village start getting sick. The same fever, the same weakness. Some recover quickly, others don't. The small cemetery behind the temple begins filling with graves that shouldn't exist, headstones marking lives that ended too soon. Your son recovers thanks to his mother's care and perhaps some intervention from the ancestors. His survival feels like a miracle, but you know other families aren't so fortunate. The sound of mourning becomes a constant backdrop to village life. Food becomes the focus of every conversation, every thought, every decision. People discuss the nutritional value of grass, the safety of eating certain roots, the possibility of catching rats or birds. Conversations that would have been unthinkable a year ago now seem perfectly normal. The village's grain stores are empty by late summer. The emergency supplies maintained for exactly this type of disaster are exhausted. Even the seed grain saved for next year's planting has been eaten. There's nothing left to plant and nothing left to eat. You make the decision to leave in early autumn. The journey to the city is dangerous, especially with children, but staying means certain starvation. You pack what little you have, say goodbye to the land your family has worked for generations, and join the stream of refugees heading east. The road is crowded with people like you, farmers who've lost everything, merchants whose businesses have collapsed, families searching for any opportunity to survive. You travel during the cooler parts of the day, rest in whatever shade you can find, and try to make your limited food supplies last as long as possible. Other travelers share information about conditions ahead. Some cities are turning away refugees unable to feed their own populations. Others are accepting newcomers but can't provide work or housing. The choices are all bad, but some are worse than others. You meet a family from a village 50 miles south of yours. They describe conditions identical to what you've experienced. Failed crops, empty wells, starving children. The father, a man about your age, tells you he's heard similar stories from everywhere. The drought isn't local, it's regional, maybe even national. It's like the heavens have forgotten us, he says, as you share a meager meal by the roadside. Like the gods have decided we don't deserve rain anymore. You reach the city after a week of walking. The sight that greets you is overwhelming. Thousands of people camped outside the walls, families living in makeshift shelters, children begging for food that doesn't exist. The city is already overwhelmed with refugees, and more arrive every day. The local authorities have set up distribution centers, but the lines are enormous and the supplies are limited. You wait for hours in the hope of receiving a small portion of rice or perhaps some thin soup. Sometimes you succeed, sometimes you don't. Your wife finds work washing clothes for wealthy families, earning barely enough to buy a single meal. You look for any kind of employment, competing with hundreds of other desperate men for jobs that pay almost nothing. The children stay close to your shelter, too weak from hunger to play. Disease spreads quickly through the refugee camps. Cholera, dysentery, typhoid. People weakened by hunger have no resistance to illness. The death toll climbs daily, and burial sites fill faster than new ones can be prepared. You survive the winter somehow. Your family stays together, stays alive, even as others around you succumb to hunger and disease. Spring arrives with the promise of new planting season, but you have no land to plant and no seed to sow. The monsoons return in May, finally. The rains that should have come the previous year arrive with almost violent intensity. Fields that have been dry for months are suddenly flooded. The water that would have saved last year's crops now destroys this year's hopes. You realize you're witnessing something unprecedented. Weather patterns that have remained stable for centuries are changing. The reliable seasons your ancestors depended on are no longer reliable. The world itself seems to be shifting beneath your feet. Recovery will take years. The social fabric of entire regions has been torn apart, families scattered, communities destroyed, traditional ways of life abandoned. The mountain in Indonesia has reached across the world to reshape your existence in ways you're only beginning to understand. Your story is one of millions. Across Asia, similar scenes play out. In India, the monsoon failures trigger famines that kill hundreds of thousands. In Southeast Asia, rice crops fail across entire regions. The particles in the atmosphere, invisible and distant, are reshaping human civilization, one failed harvest at a time. The year without a summer has become a year of global suffering. The volcano that stole the sun has stolen much more than weather. It's stolen security, stability, the basic assumption that tomorrow will be like today. The world is learning in the most painful way possible just how interconnected everything really is. Now let's shift our focus to a very different scene, though one equally shaped by the strange weather of 1816. You're in Switzerland, at a villa overlooking Lake Geneva. The year is turning from spring to what should be summer, but the weather remains cold, grey, and uninviting. Rain pounds against the windows with relentless persistence. You're Mary Godwin, 18 years old, though you'll soon become Mary Shelley. Your mind is sharp, curious, shaped by a childhood spent among some of England's most radical thinkers. Your father, William Godwin, is a famous philosopher and novelist. Your mother, Mary Wollstonecraft, wrote A Vindication of the Rights of Woman before dying shortly after your birth. You've come to Switzerland with your lover, Percy Shelley, escaping the scandal of your relationship. Percy is married to another woman, and your liaison has made you both social outcasts in England. The villa by Lake Geneva was supposed to be a romantic retreat, a place to write and think and explore ideas without the constraints of conventional society. Instead, you find yourself trapped indoors by weather that seems designed to frustrate every plan. The summer of 1816 is turning into an endless series of grey days and cold nights. The mountains that should be green with summer vegetation remain snow-capped well into June. The lake, which should be inviting for swimming and boating, is choppy and uninviting under the pewter sky. Your neighbour in the villa next door is Lord Byron, 28 years old and already famous throughout Europe for his romantic poetry and scandalous reputation. He's accompanied by his personal physician, John Polidori, a young man only slightly older than yourself with ambitions to become a writer. The four of you have formed an unlikely household, brought together by circumstances and held together by the endless rain. Days pass with conversations about philosophy, literature, science, and the nature of human existence. The topics are weighty, but the atmosphere is surprisingly intimate, like a private seminar conducted by candlelight. Byron has a restless energy that the confined weather seems to amplify. He paces the rooms of his villa, dictates poetry to his servants, and grows increasingly frustrated with the limitations imposed by the climate. He's used to active summers, to travels across Europe, to adventures that feed his creative spirit. "This is insufferable," he declares one evening as you all gather in his sitting room. Rain streaks the windows and the temperature requires a fire, even though it's July. "We're living like prisoners in our own homes." Percy, ever the optimist, suggests that confinement might be conducive to creativity. "Think of it as an opportunity," he says, "a chance to focus entirely on our work without the distractions of normal social life." You're less convinced. The constant grey weather is having a strange effect on your mood, your thoughts, your dreams. Everything feels heavier, more oppressive. The world outside seems hostile, alien, as if nature itself has turned against human comfort. Polidori, who's been reading a collection of German ghost stories, suggests they might find inspiration in darker themes. "Why don't we each write a supernatural tale?" he proposes. "Something to match the mood of this dreadful summer." The idea appeals to Byron immediately. He's always been drawn to the dramatic, the mysterious, the forbidden. Percy agrees, seeing it as an interesting creative challenge. You're initially hesitant, but the prospect of channeling your strange mood into something productive is appealing. The contest begins casually enough. Byron starts work on a tale about a vampire, inspired by local folklore and his own fascination with the undead. Percy begins a story based on childhood experiences, though he abandons it quickly. Polidori, excited by the prospect of literary success, dives into his own supernatural narrative. You struggle at first. The others seem to have immediate inspiration, clear visions of what they want to create. You sit with pen and paper, but the words won't come. The blank page seems to mock your efforts. Days pass with little progress. The weather continues its relentless gloom, and the villa feels increasingly claustrophobic. You walk the rooms at night, unable to sleep, your mind churning with half-formed ideas and shapeless anxieties. Then comes the night that changes everything. You're lying in bed, listening to the rain against the window, when sleep finally comes. The dream that follows is unlike anything you've experienced before. Vivid, terrifying, and completely compelling. You see a scientist, pale and consumed with obsession, working by candlelight in a laboratory filled with strange apparatus. He's attempting something that violates the natural order, something that crosses the boundary between life and death. Through a combination of chemistry and electricity, he succeeds in animating dead tissue, creating a being that should not exist. The creature that emerges from his work is hideous, powerful, and tragically aware of its own monstrosity. It looks upon its creator with eyes that hold intelligence, pain, and growing rage. The scientist, horrified by what he's accomplished, flees from his creation, leaving it alone in the world. You wake with your heart pounding, the images from the dream still vivid and disturbing. This is it, you realize. This is your story for the contest. You rise immediately and begin writing, the words flowing as if they're dictating themselves. The story that emerges over the following weeks becomes Frankenstein, or the modern Prometheus. It's a tale perfectly suited to the dark summer of 1816, exploring themes of isolation, creation, and the consequences of playing God. The cold, oppressive weather that's trapped you indoors becomes the perfect backdrop for a story about scientific hubris and human responsibility. Your companions are amazed by what you've created. Byron, despite his own literary fame, recognizes the power of your narrative. Percy, who's known your intelligence since you were barely 16, is nevertheless impressed by the depth and complexity of your vision. Even Polidori, competitive as he is, acknowledges the strength of your work. The villa becomes a workshop where you refine and expand your story. The characters develop complexity, the themes deepen, the philosophical questions become more sophisticated. You're not just writing a ghost story anymore. You're creating a modern myth, a tale that will speak to fundamental anxieties about science, technology, and human nature. Byron completes his vampire tale, though he eventually abandons it as a fragment. Polidori, inspired by Byron's work, develops his own vampire story, The Vampire, which will later become the foundation for all modern vampire fiction. The gloomy summer that began as a frustration becomes the birthplace of two of literature's most enduring monsters. The Villa by Lake Geneva becomes a microcosm of the broader world struggling with the effects of the volcanic winter. Just as farmers and merchants and governments are learning to adapt to new conditions, you and your companions are learning to transform crisis into opportunity. The creative output from that single summer is remarkable. Frankenstein will become one of the most influential novels ever written, helping to create the science fiction genre and exploring themes that remain relevant centuries later. Polidori's vampire story will spawn countless adaptations and influence popular culture for generations. You're discovering that the human spirit doesn't just endure catastrophe. Sometimes it transforms catastrophe into something beautiful, something meaningful, something that speaks to the deepest truths about what it means to be human. The year without a summer has become, unexpectedly, a year of profound creative achievement. Let's shift our perspective now to London, England, 1817. A gentleman scholar named William Thompson, 42 years old, with ink-stained fingers and a mind that never stops questioning. He has a comfortable study lined with books, a writing desk positioned to catch the morning light, and a growing obsession with understanding what happened to the world's weather. He's spent the last year collecting reports from around the globe. Letters from correspondents in India describing monsoon failures, newspaper accounts from America detailing the Great Exodus from New England, ships' logs documenting strange atmospheric phenomena observed at sea, weather records from observatories across Europe showing the same impossible pattern of cold. His desk is covered with charts, graphs and maps. Red pins mark locations where unusual weather was reported. Blue pins indicate crop failures. Black pins show where famine struck. The pattern that emerges tells a story that seems too vast to be true, yet too consistent to be coincidence. He's not the only one asking questions. Across Europe, natural philosophers are grappling with the same mystery. How could the entire planet experience the same weather anomaly simultaneously? What force could be powerful enough to change the climate everywhere at once? The answer, when it comes, arrives in a letter from a Dutch colonial administrator in the East Indies. He describes an eruption that took place in April 1815 on an island called Sumbawa. The mountain was called Tambora, and the explosion was unlike anything in recorded history. At first, the connection seems impossible. How could a volcanic eruption in Indonesia affect the weather in New England? The distances are too great, the mechanisms too unclear. But as he studies the timeline, the correlation becomes undeniable. The eruption in April 1815, the strange sunsets and atmospheric phenomena reported throughout 1815, and the climate disaster of 1816 all fit together like pieces of a puzzle. He begins to understand something profound about the world. The atmosphere doesn't recognize political boundaries. Air currents circle the globe, carrying particles and influences from one continent to another. What happens in one place can affect everywhere else. The Earth's climate is not a collection of isolated local systems, but a single, interconnected whole. He publishes his findings in the Royal Society's journal, though he knows many of his colleagues will resist the implications. The idea that a single volcanic eruption could cause global climate change challenges the prevailing belief that weather is purely local. It suggests a level of planetary interconnectedness that makes many people uncomfortable. But evidence is evidence, and the evidence is overwhelming. The year without a summer wasn't a collection of unrelated local disasters. It was a single global catastrophe with a single identifiable cause. For the first time in human history, people begin to understand that the Earth's climate system is fragile, interconnected, and vulnerable to disruption. His work becomes part of the foundation for a new science. Future generations will call it climatology, the study of climate patterns and changes. The basic insight he stumbled upon, the understanding that local events can have global consequences, will remain central to how humans understand their relationship with the planet. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, the consequences of 1816 are reshaping entire societies. The Great Migration from New England to the Ohio Valley is a transformation of American culture, economy, and politics. Thousands of families have converged on the Ohio Valley, driven from their homes by the same impossible weather. The population of Ohio increases by nearly 50% in just 2 years. New towns spring up almost overnight. Forests that stood for centuries are cleared in months to make room for farms and settlements. The cultural impact is enormous. These migrants not only bring their belongings, they bring their ideas, their technologies, their ways of organizing society. New England values of education, industry, and democratic participation spread across the frontier. Schools are established, churches built, newspapers founded. But there's also conflict. The indigenous peoples who have lived on this land for thousands of years are pushed aside by the flood of settlers. Treaties are broken, boundaries ignored. The climate disaster that began with a volcanic eruption in Indonesia contributes to the displacement and suffering of Native American communities halfway around the world. The migrants also bring new agricultural techniques and crops. Forced to start over, they experiment with different plants, different methods. Some discover that the climate here is better suited to wheat than corn. Others find that the soil supports crops that failed in New England. Innovation born from desperation begins to transform American agriculture. In Europe, the consequences are even more dramatic. The crop failures of 1816 lead to the worst famine in centuries. In Switzerland, the death rate triples. In Ireland, typhus outbreaks follow the failure of the potato harvest. Across Germany, people eat bark, grass, and whatever else they can find to survive. The social order begins to crack under the pressure. Hungry people don't respect property rights or traditional authority. Food riots break out in major cities. Governments struggle to maintain order while dealing with unprecedented numbers of refugees and migrants. But crisis also sparks innovation. In Germany, a baron named Karl von Drais invents a new form of transportation, a two-wheeled contraption he calls a running machine. Later generations will know it as the bicycle. He developed it because the famine killed so many horses that alternative forms of transport became necessary. The famine also accelerates existing social and political changes. The old feudal systems that depended on agricultural surplus become unsustainable. Peasants abandon their traditional obligations to landlords. Cities grow as people flee the countryside. The Industrial Revolution, already underway, gains momentum as societies look for alternatives to agriculture. In Asia, the monsoon failures trigger massive population movements. In China, millions of people migrate from the affected regions, spreading new ideas and technologies as they go. In India, the disaster contributes to political instability that will ultimately weaken the Mughal Empire and strengthen British colonial control. The global economy is transformed. Trade routes shift as some regions become unable to produce their traditional exports. New financial instruments are developed to deal with the unprecedented risks of climate-related disasters. Insurance markets begin to price in the possibility of global catastrophes. Perhaps most importantly, the year without a summer changes how humans think about their relationship with nature. Before 1816, most people believed that local weather was just that, local. They assumed that human activity was too small to affect the global climate. They trusted that the seasons would always follow their familiar patterns. After 1816, that innocence is lost. People begin to understand that the Earth's climate is a single, interconnected system. They realize that events in distant places can have consequences everywhere. They learn that the natural world is more powerful and more fragile than they previously imagined. This new understanding doesn't lead to immediate action. It will be another century before humans fully grasp the implications of their ability to alter the global climate. But the seeds of that understanding are planted in 1816, in the minds of people who experienced firsthand how quickly and dramatically the world can change. The scientific revolution that begins with the study of Tambora's effects will eventually lead to modern climate science. The social changes triggered by the migration will contribute to the development of democratic institutions and industrial society. The economic disruptions will spark innovations in finance, transportation, and agriculture. In ways that no one could have predicted, the mountain that stole the sun also planted the seeds of the modern world. The connections aren't always direct or obvious. The bicycle invented during the famine will eventually contribute to the development of the automobile. The agricultural innovations sparked by migration will help feed the growing populations of industrial cities. The climate science that begins with studying Tambora will eventually help humanity understand and address future climate challenges. For the first time in human history, people experienced a truly global disaster. They learned that they shared a common fate with people they would never meet, in places they would never visit. They discovered that the Earth's climate connects all humanity in ways they never imagined. The mountain that stole the sun didn't just change the weather, it changed how humans understand their place in the world and set in motion changes that continue to shape our lives today. The year without a summer teaches us that climate change isn't just an environmental issue. It's a human issue. It affects where people live, what they eat, how they work, and how societies organize themselves. But 1816 also shows us that humans are remarkably adaptable. The families who abandoned their farms in Vermont thrived, creating new communities and new ways of life. The societies that faced famine in Europe didn't collapse, they innovated, developing new technologies and new forms of organization. The question for our time is whether we can learn from the past without having to repeat it. Can we adapt to climate change without experiencing the kind of suffering that millions of people endured in 1816? Can we innovate and transform our societies before crisis forces us to? The story continues, and as you drift off to sleep tonight, remember that we're all part of it. Sweet dreams and stay curious.